We spoke a fair bit yesterday about the latest figures on the Australian economy and the government's hopes that things will only improve from here, given tax cuts are flowing and so on. A lot will depend on that US-China trade war, which is taking a toll on the global economy, as we know. There was some good news today, though, in relation to the US-China trade dispute. The two countries have agreed to hold high-level talks in Washington next month. It follows a phone call between China's Vice President, the US Treasury Secretary and the US Trade Representative. They've agreed there will be some lower-level negotiations in the next couple of weeks before the high-level negotiations in Washington in October. On Sunday, the US imposed 15% tariffs on a range of Chinese goods, and that prompted China to complain to the World Trade Organization and also slap its own new duties on US crude oil. Both sides claim this trade war is hurting the other more than it is themselves, but clearly both sides are also hurting and aware of the need for some sort of resolution. Here's what China's ambassador to Australia, in fact, wrote in a piece for the Australian Financial Review today. He said, "He who tries to blow out the other's oil lamp will set his beard on fire. The price of Trump's tariffs will be paid by common American households. We do not want a trade war," he says, but China not afraid of fighting one. We've also seen today Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam defending her decision to now officially withdraw a contentious extradition bill that sparked some months ago the protests that have, really dominated so much global attention over recent weeks in particular. The legislation would have allowed people in Hong Kong to be extradited to mainland China to face trial there. And this, as I say, served as the catalyst for all these protests that followed. It has morphed essentially into a wider anti-democratic movement, pro-democratic movement on the part of those in Hong Kong. But this withdrawal of the extradition bill has been one of the protesters' key demands. Carrie Lam had previously said the bill was dead, but had stopped short of actually withdrawing it. Well, now she's done that. We heard her say so overnight. She held a press conference about this today.
I want to reiterate here that the sole purpose of the electoral procedure is to withdraw the bill. This involves the Secretary for Security as a responsible government official to announce in the Legislative Council that the bill will be withdrawn. There will be no debate and no voting.
Well, Australia's amongst a number of countries that has been closely watching and expressing concern about the situation in Hong Kong. I want to go to Liberal MP Dave Sharma. He's a former diplomat and has been watching this issue very closely as well. Thanks for your time this afternoon. Carrie Lam has now withdrawn this extradition bill. She's also said she wants a dialogue about the problems in Hong Kong and has announced there will be what she's calling a council, including some international experts, to look at complaints over the actions of police. It's not an independent panel of experts that some have wanted. But what do you make of this? I mean, is this a major back down from the Beijing-backed administration here?
Well, I think there are important concessions that Carrie Lam has made to the protests and the legitimate demands of some of the protests. And I think the most important thing is that, these protests and the grievances of the protests are resolved through, political means, through negotiated means and through the agency of Hong Kong institutions and Hong Kong mechanisms so that Hong Kong preserves its unique status within China as part of one country, two systems.
Does it surprise you, though, because only a couple of weeks ago we saw China amassing armoured personnel carriers on the border and really, sending out video warnings and ramping up through state media some of the threats that they were about to storm in. Now we see a very different approach.
That's true, but I think, we don't know, I guess, the role that China has played behind the scenes in resolving these protests, and we don't know the extent to which they're in communication with Carrie Lam. I'm not going to speculate there, but I think where we've reached...
But we know she wouldn't do this without Beijing's support. I mean, let's be honest.
I presume not, but I don't know that for a fact. But I presume she's acting, with some coordination with the mainland and with their blessing. But I think it's a good and responsible course of action that she has decided to take. I think it provides for a peaceful resolution of these protests and it allows Hong Kong to preserve its status within China.
So when you say it provides for a peaceful resolution, I mean, we'll see whether it does, but you believe this should be enough now to lower the temperature in Hong Kong?
Well, I believe it should be. I mean, some of the demands of the protesters, I think Carrie Lam has gone a long way towards addressing. She's withdrawn the extradition bill, which was a key demand of the protesters. She's announced an inquiry of sorts into the handling of the unrest and the police actions, which I think is also another demand that's been put forward. So I think, she's going quite some way towards meeting the demands of the protesters, and I think that's an important concession she's made, and, we should applaud her for that.
Now, you're the chair of the Parliamentary Treaties Committee. One of the treaties being looked at is a proposed trade deal between Australia and Hong Kong.
That's right.
How important is a peaceful solution in Hong Kong when it comes to the consideration of this trade deal?
Well, it's certainly the political situation in Hong Kong is certainly something that the committee has been mindful of as it reviews this free trade agreement that Australia has concluded with Hong Kong. But I think I would say that, certainly my opening view on this is that a free trade agreement between Australia and Hong Kong, the special administrative region of Hong Kong, will help strengthen the status of Hong Kong as a unique entity within one country, two systems, and it's a good thing for that reason. We need to be mindful of the political situation in Hong Kong. We need to be mindful of some of the violent protests and what's been going on. But everything else being equal, I think a free trade agreement would help strengthen Hong Kong's unique identity and help preserve its unique identity, and that's something that's very much in Australia's interests.
But bottom line, no peaceful resolution, no deal?
Well, we're not due to report, I don't think, for about another month, David, and the government will then need to consider our report and decide whether they act on the recommendation. So, this protests have been going on for 13 weeks now, but I think they've moved along quite a bit since they started. Let's see where we are, in 4 or 5 weeks' time when the committee's due to report.
I mean, just generally on Hong Kong, you've watched China's rise over many years with great interest. Do you really think, while they might settle this particular dispute over this extradition bill, we're not going to see more of this sort of tension inevitably over the years to come in Hong Kong?
Look, we might. I mean, the whole sort of the handover of Hong Kong in 1994 was a compact, really, which allowed the preservation of a degree of autonomy for Hong Kong, but it recognised the ultimate sovereignty for China. And there is obviously a little degree of tension that's implicit in that. How much autonomy does Hong Kong get to exercise? Where does the sovereignty of China end? So, it's natural that there should be some tension in that relationship, but I believe it's in both sides' interests and certainly in the world's interest for the status quo to be preserved as much as possible.
One of the other trade deals your committee is looking at is the trade deal with Indonesia. Will you take a similar approach, given your concerns expressed about the protest movement in Hong Kong, when it comes to the protest movement in West Papua? We've seen one of the biggest and worst protests there in years over the last few weeks. People have died. How much is that weighing on your considerations about the trade deal with Indonesia?
I don't think we should be linking those two things there. I mean, I've seen the reports out of West Papua and they are of concern, and I'd like to see some more information about that. But I think, Indonesia is a massively important country in relationship for Australia. They're our nearest and largest northern neighbour, or sorry, second nearest. Papua New Guinea is our nearest. And, we have a whole breadth of relations with this country of 240 million people. The economic potential of the relationship is vastly underdone. And it's in both our interests that we address that, and this free trade agreement will do exactly that.
But surely, for consistency, you'd want some peaceful resolution there before you approve a trade deal with Indonesia?
Well, I mean, the committee will, recommend or make recommendations on the basis of the deal that's in front of us. But I think, I think what we're talking about in West Papua is of a far different scale and magnitude to what we're seeing in Hong Kong. I mean, in Hong Kong, we've seen, 1/4 to 1/3 of the population mobilised in protests. Indonesia is a country of 240 million people, and we're talking about some incidents in one province. So I think we need to keep things in perspective here. Of course, they're of a concern, but I wouldn't make the same linkages.
OK. Look, a final issue away from all of that. What's your view, Dave Sharma, on the Tamil asylum seeker family? Should the government use ministerial powers to allow them to stay in Biloela?
Well, like most Australians, I've got a lot of sympathy for the predicament of the family, and as a human being, as an Australian, I have a lot of empathy for them. But I think it's important that we maintain the integrity of our migration system, which is a rules-based, migration system. It's based upon the rule of law and due process, and these people have, accessed due process. They've accessed the rule of law. They've found not to be refugees. They don't have a well-founded fear of persecution for their return to their home country. And I worry that, you know, hard cases make bad law, that if you begin to make exceptions on the basis of individual circumstances, compassionate as they might be, you end up undermining the foundations of your whole system, and you end up doing what none of us want, which is basically, you know, restarting the people smuggling trade.
All right, Liberal MP Dave Sharma, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David.